Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Max Verstappen wins his 16th Grand Prix of the season in front of the Mexican crowd and an absolute masterclass for himself and Lewis Hamilton at the front of the field as Hamilton closes the gap to P2 in the drivers quite considerably indeed with another DNF for Sergio Perez. After a disastrous run of form lately, this was the race he needed to get right and an absolute disaster starting in turn 1. Big mistake, lots of controversy, so many storylines to dive into today. If yesterday outqualified by Ricciardo was one of the nails in the coffin, is this the final nail in the coffin of Perez's time in the Red Bull? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Before the race began, Stroll, here's Aston Martin, making changes again within Parc Ferme, so basically breaking Parc Ferme, so they have to start from the pit lane. They did this before, last time out in Austin, and actually kind of worked out for them. They changed a lot, running the Qatar spec floor, but the Austin diffuser. It seems like Aston Martin have said, you know what, we're just going to gather data for the rest of the season, and apparently that's their plan, and clearly it didn't really help them out today. It's kind of crazy how Aston Martin went from being, honestly, regular podium finishes. Alonso still has like 8 podiums this season, and let's not forget they should have won the race in Monaco. If they pitted on the right lap, they would have undercut Max Verstappen and won that race, but yeah, they made the wrong decision. They got P2 that day, and since then, it's been all downhill, nearly a pole there as well, of course, without that ridiculous Sector 3 from Verstappen. But yeah, Aston Martin had fallen off so badly. There was also big concern today, especially from Mercedes, but also for other cars, about cooling. This is a big issue around Mexico. With the higher altitude, less air gets into the engine, into the brakes, into the tyres. The cars get really hot when you're running in the dirty air of the car in front, especially if you've got to try and manage tyres and brake temperatures. It's a difficult thing to manage. We know the Ferrari has struggled with that before here as well, but it was a big concern for Mercedes going into the Grand Prix. Let's dive into it then, because this was the moment of the race really, and to be honest, it's how it often is in Mexico. It's not a great track as far as I'm concerned. It's one of these circuits like Baku that they have a big straight and people, some people think that makes it a good track. That's not how it works, but it does mean that turn 1 usually creates a lot of chaos. We know full well that P3 is the place to start it, but also I don't think it matters where Max Verstappen starts. He's just unreal into turn 1 in Mexico. Like, his record into turn 1 in Mexico is outrageous. From P1, wherever he starts, he always seems to be leading. I think he's led there, 6 out of the last 7 times he's had a run down at turn 1. And this is another example. Immediately on the launch, you could see Verstappen got a better launch, and it was like, all right, this is probably over. He flies through the 2 Ferraris and was leading by turn 1. And, the race at that point was immediately over, but the pace advantage was such that, frankly, it wouldn't really have mattered. But this is where Perez, he gets a phenomenal launch here. You can see that already, he's way beyond where Hamilton started. He's already up on Ricciardo and is getting a monster slipstream in that very slippery Red Bull down into turn 1. Sainz is on a poor line here, so he is kind of off to the right-hand side. Perez gets a mega run into turn 1, and this is exactly what happened in Qatar. I mean, it's so identical, even the way the corner is laid out, the way the situation was, where Hamilton turned in, contact with Russell, with Verstappen on the inside. And this is Sergio Perez trying to go around the outside of turn 1 here. The move was maybe on, but he was alongside, but he didn't have the inside line. He thought he could brake later than Leclerc, but that wasn't the case. Didn't brake late enough. Turns across Leclerc. Leclerc gets completely squeezed, and you can see how much track Perez had on the outside again to use. Verstappen's in an ideal position going into the corner. Leclerc was sandwiched, and okay, you might think, oh, Leclerc's pointing left, but that's because of the contact. The car turns as a result, and we can see some of the other instances here. This was Leclerc's onboard. We've got Verstappen on his right-hand side, and Perez just turns right. I mean, look how far Perez has turned across here. He's got 2 cars on his inside. I mean, yeah, it's just another very clumsy mistake from Sergio Perez, and a weekend where he really didn't need another massively clumsy mistake. And it's incredible how, after getting blessed by Hamilton's disqualification in Austin, gaining a place, and also Hamilton losing all the points that he gains, this was his chance in a very fast Red Bull around here, dominant Red Bull in fact, as we saw with Verstappen towards the end of the race, to at least put some solid points on the board. He's managed to bottle the chance. It's actually staggering how disappointing Perez has been. He is closer to Nick de Vries in this year's championship than he is to Max Verstappen. I'll just say that again. He's closer to having 0 points than he is to Max Verstappen's point total this year. And to do this in front of your home Grand Prix is just so staggering, especially because the car's obviously going to be quick. If the car is close enough to pole, it's probably going to have half a second race pace edge. That's what the Red Bull's been like all year. And even in Perez's hands, that should be enough. And with the crazy good DRS and with the incredible straight line speeds, like we saw when Max was making passes through the field, nobody was defending. There was no point. The straight line speed delta was way too significant with the DRS open. Perez could have done the same thing with time. If he'd have just chilled out today, he probably finishes P2, but he went for the hero move around the outside, and I get it. He probably thought, you know what, if I can get Leclerc here and Max, maybe I can win this race. But surely you just bide your time. Crazy things happen. We got a red flag, we got safety cars, virtual safety cars, lots of opportunities if Perez just slotted into P3 here to make moves happen later in the race. Who knows, Verstappen might, get an engine failure and DNF. But yeah, for Perez to do this in front of his home crowd and just go out of the race immediately, it's just tragic. And as we can see in this image, the damage to that side pod was irreparable, right? There was no way of getting this guy back into the race. They looked at it, they tried, they wanted to put Perez back out, but it just wasn't going to happen. There was nothing they could do about this. And as I say, it was almost identical to what happened before. And it was funny because Tsunoda did the same thing later in the race. It's almost like they were telling Yuki, like, hey, if you want to get into a Red Bull, you've got to start driving like a Red Bull driver. And that's exactly what he did by copying Perez's move here into turn one. So yeah, Perez out of the race immediately. We'll see his reaction to it in a second. This also damaged Leclerc's front wing, but surprisingly, after it fell off, they actually were investigating, and maybe they still are, for driving in an unsafe condition, but not really sure what he's meant to do. And if they wanted it gone, they could have black and orange flagged him to make him pit, but they didn't. He stayed out. Eventually it flew off. There was a VSC to cover them clearing that up, but Perez into the pits for another retirement, right? And your home Grand Prix, out-qualified by Ricciardo on the Saturday, turn up to Sunday with a rocket ship and, DNF on corner one. It's just, man, what is going on for Perez? The pressure was on him here to deliver, and, you can't deny that he choked under the pressure. It was a big mistake. Hamilton was heavily criticised for the mistake back in Qatar. This one was arguably even more egregious given the circumstances, because at least in that Grand Prix, Hamilton started on the much better tyres. If he'd have got that move done, he might have had a chance on a weekend where Verstappen didn't have crazy pace relative to the competition. This time it was like, well, what's Perez fighting for here, really? Surely just try and finish on the podium in your home Grand Prix is the way to go this weekend. He then responded in the media pen and said that he basically invoked the Senna quote, the classic Senna quote that everybody talks about. And the quote that Senna, even after the fact, said that, yeah, well, really, I wasn't, I didn't mean that absolutely as I said it at the time. The whole, if you see a gap, you go for the gap, regardless of the circumstances. And as he said, I took a risk to exit that corner first and go for the victory. Hurts a lot for the people. Let's be honest here. He was starting P5, like you're starting P5, you've got a monster start. Are you really going to be sending it around the outside and try and take the lead? Surely you'd just be happy at that point with getting P3. I understand what he's thinking, but I wanted to give them the victory. I gave it my all, but so many more laps in the race, to finish first you have to finish, and some drivers understand this, and some drivers clearly do not. So Perez at this point was like, well, damn, already it's not looking good. Ricciardo's out-qualified me and is going to outscore me. Now it's time to look at the Drivers' Championship with Lewis Hamilton, and Hamilton made the absolute utmost of this opportunity today. The car was running hot, of course, as we mentioned. A good move that he got done eventually on Daniel Ricciardo, and you can see here Piastri and Russell in the background. Today really was a masterclass again by Max and Lewis. It's unbelievable how good these guys are compared to the rest of the grid, to be honest. Like the delta they were putting on the drivers around them. Same thing we saw in Austin, really. But of course, Hamilton was disqualified from that race after finishing P2 as he did here. So Hamilton got up to P4, was chasing down the Ferraris. Verstappen Verstappen's pace on the mediums wasn't particularly mega, and it was kind of interesting to see that, really, because, you know, he wasn't putting a massive gap on Leclerc, and then he even said that his tyres were basically dead, and he had to pit way earlier than anybody else to go onto the hard, which I think was last year's medium, which did, I mean, we know, like, last year's medium tyre, which was this year's hard tyre, I think, for Max, did, like, you know, 50 laps on exactly the same lap time, right? So, you know, we knew that on that tyre, the Red Bull was going to be very good. But, yeah, I just brought up a couple of these tweets as well, just to say, okay, this isn't a real graphic yet, but you might well picture after the event of today, this could be the case in the very near future. So, we also got to mention Alonso and Stroll, man. I mean, you feel bad, because I was mentioning Hamilton and Verstappen, absolute masterclass. Alonso was up there at the start of the season. Now he's in a tractor again, and even, I think he had an issue with the car, he even let Stroll through. Maybe Stroll actually did a legit overtake here, I don't know, but yeah, they were fighting way down the order. Hamilton was talking about that he was really enjoying the balance in the car, and we saw that over time. And then as we saw from Verstappen, the tyres on lap, 19, 18, something like that, pretty much dead for Max. So he had to come into the pits, and he went for the undercut and was just immediately, overtaking anyone with massive speed. Then though, we got a very interesting set of decisions from Ferrari. As usual with Ferrari. So Hamilton had tried to push Sainz, but he couldn't get the move done, didn't have enough tyre left. Hamilton then pitted on lap 24, 25 or so, and actually, fair play to Mercedes, after all the talk from Toto in midweek that, alright, we've got to focus on these pit stops, get them nailed down, they put in some great pit stops here. 2.5 for Hamilton, 2.6 for Russell. That's more like it, like that's a good amount of time. I mean, you think 0.7 of a second over a 3.3 stop, that's a big time gain from a 2.6 to a 3.3, for example. What these Mercedes boys often go through, then they thought, Ferrari, all right, let's extend on this stint. And those mediums at the start of the race weren't really massively degrading. And to be fair, we kind of saw that in the final stint as well. Leclerc was still pretty quick, Sainz was still pretty quick, but by doing so, Sainz especially gave the massive undercut to Hamilton. So confusing from Ferrari to say the very least, thinking that maybe Hamilton couldn't get the one stop done. Did he have the tyre degradation management necessary to make that happen? Ferrari thought no, but the answer was most definitely yes. And I'm very surprised Ferrari didn't try and cover the undercut. They just let Hamilton have the track position for free. And of course, eventually the red flag happens, which throws another spanner in the works. Of course, Perez at this point still talking to the media, lap 30 or so. Verstappen's already fast his lap and is about to be leading the race again. And then we get a red flag incident. This race would have been so dull without this. Good that Magnussen is okay, but it at least did throw a bit of a spanner in the works. So Verstappen was leading by 23 seconds here. So he actually had a full pit stop gap to use to put a brand new set of hard tyres on. He had another brand new set of hard tyres from there to the end of the race. It was only Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda that had another brand new set of hards to use in this circumstance. That was the best tyre, right? I mean, the hard tyre for 35 laps was the one you wanted, but you didn't want one that was like 10 laps old at that point. So Magnussen gets a big issue. I mean, as you guys can see here, his left rear tyre, the suspension completely breaks going over this curb, and yeah, the tyre just snaps in half, basically. Well, okay, the suspension snaps in half, the tyre pretty much falls off, and he is a passenger into the wall here. Heavy impact. It was enough damage to the barrier to cause a red flag. We've had lots of red flags, and you've got to think the stewards are being... they love a red flag nowadays, We saw last decade, we saw probably as many red flags as we have seen so far in this decade, just a few years in. They love it nowadays, and I don't know, but I think that they do it more than maybe they otherwise would, because it does add a level of entertainment, especially around Mexico, when there ain't much happening apart from that run down into turn one. Verstappen was talking about, it's a joke, red flag for what? All the drivers do this, I know people were roasting Verstappen for it. Hamilton would do it as well. I think, was it Saudi Arabia? Maybe he did this as well when there was a crash. I'm not exactly sure, but it happens, right? The drivers want what's in their best interest. They're going to make comments on it. But I think in the circumstances, the red flag was a reasonable call given the repair that needed to be done. Now, I don't know if this was during the red flag. I kind of hope that it wasn't, but it did happen. This, I thought I'd mention it now while we have the little red flag pause. This was going on in the crowd. We've got, what am I seeing here, man? We've got a Ferrari fan, we've got some sort of, I don't know if this guy's a Checo fan, I don't know what's going on, but for some reason, there was a massive scrap going on in the crowd. I don't know whether this was a result of Charles Leclerc taking out Perez that he really didn't. It was Perez's fault. But, you know, I guess Leclerc was responsible for Perez going out the race because he existed, I guess, in that position. And, yeah, so there was some I mean, look at this, man. There's some scrubbing going on in the crowds. Apparently, this guy was eventually removed from the venue and has been given a life ban from attending the races again, which is definitely the right decision. But, yeah, pretty wild. I mean, like, what is this turning into right now? So anyway, the restart does eventually happen, and Hamilton was starting P3 and on the medium tyres. That was theoretically going to be a good advantage here for him, and he didn't get a good launch. I mean, you could see immediately again, Verstappen this season, when he's needed to get good starts, he's really delivered. And his start here was impeccable on the hard tyre. Obviously, pretty much a brand new set, slightly scrubs, got a really great launch. The Red Bull's so quick that he wasn't going to get caught, similar to last year's race start, really. Hamilton could only be P3. I think he would have liked to at least get to P2 here before the first corner. Leclerc, though, stayed ahead. And then Hamilton needed to work really hard to get the move done quick because he's on the mediums, Leclerc's on the hard tyres because Leclerc and Sainz pitted just before the safety car red flag, and that meant that they, you know, pretty much those hards are brand new and it was the better tyre to get to the end of the race. Hamilton needed to get the move done now because everybody thought, can that medium go to the end? It's going to be a tall order to make it last. And most drivers were, at the end, struggling on that medium. Russell very much especially. But Hamilton got this move done quick. And, I mean, a phenomenal move, honestly. This was, I mean, there were some good overtakes this race. Norris got a great one on Ricciardo and on Russell, to be fair. This maybe was one of the pick of the bunch, though, because, you know, Leclerc went to cover the inside line. Hamilton dived for it anyway. He had just enough room onto the white line here to make this work. Not quite on the grass. Judged it to perfection from both of these guys, really. And Hamilton carries so much speed into turn one, just about gets the car slowed down without locking up and gets the move done. So phenomenal move, and it's such a crucial time as well for Hamilton because Russell was also trying the same thing. He couldn't get Sainz, though, and that massively compromised his race because at the end of the Grand Prix, his tyres were cooked. Hamilton starts to pull a gap. Aston Martin have to retire Alonso's car with some sort of issue. I don't even know what's going on wrong with Aston, but what an absolute shambles. And then Yuki Tsunoda decides to take a leaf out of Perez's book by doing this. I don't know what he was thinking. Again, I mean, there was a bit of, you know, friction between these two guys the lap before, and Yuki was running P8. I mean, look at this. He's P8 here. Ricciardo's P6. It was looking like an incredible day for AlphaTauri. They, you know, they were good. Their cars made some progress. Ricciardo was having a phenomenal Grand Prix. Tsunoda was in the points as well. He was on those hard tyres. He thought that he could get Piastri, and he just simply turned across Oscar like he wasn't there. Gets spun around, was frustrated with himself, but frankly, he's ruined his race. And this is one of the things, like, it's almost like Ricciardo's paid these guys off. How much money has Ricciardo paid Perez, and how much money has Ricciardo paid Tsunoda? Because they made him look like a superstar this weekend. Because, you know, if you're Red Bull, you're looking at this. You're looking at Yuki do this. You're looking at Perez have another stinker, and you're thinking, Danny Rick has got to be our man, right? I mean, off the performance this weekend, you wouldn't really be able to say otherwise. There was then the swap that came at McLaren. Norris goes through on Piastri, and Norris, now it's time probably to talk about him as we look at this image of Checo Perez getting consoled by Christian Horner. Norris had mega pace. He started this race, I think, what, P17? Something like that anyway, right at the back of the grid. Made good progress a little bit on the soft tyres, then pitted quite early, did a mega undercut, helped a little bit by the red flag, had a bad start after the restart, dropped down to like P14, and then a phenomenal recovery drive from Norris. Was one of the fastest men on track, no doubt about it. Was closing in rapidly, made an incredible move on Ricciardo actually as well, which I think is this next one that we saw when I didn't think it was on, round the outside of turn 4. Don't see that gone for very often. Ricciardo gave him enough space, phenomenal stuff. And then Russell was next up in a Mercedes. I mean, yeah, Hamilton really schooled Russell today, you've got to say, in the same way that Verstappen just schools Perez every single week. Russell was nowhere near Hamilton this weekend, and yeah, the race pace at the end of that stint was, it does make me wonder back to Singapore, you know, if Russell wasn't in the way of Hamilton at the end of Singapore, I really do wonder if Hamilton wins that race because, you know, just on the evidence of what we saw today, Russell struggling to get past Sainz when Hamilton got the move done on Leclerc, just shows a difference in class. This was the move that Norris got done here on Russell, who was all out of shape, and a pretty rare position actually. This was where Ricciardo made that very questionable move last year and just banged someone off the road. I forget if it was Yuki or if it was somebody else, but this is into a very rare position to do an overtake, but Norris got it done. There was also some drama at the end of the race as well, because Stroll sent a move up the inside of Bottas going into the stadium section. It was probably a fair move, but it was a little bit, ambitious. Bottas wasn't happy with it, stuck his nose in back on the inside of the next corner, spins Stroll around. Stroll eventually has to retire from the Grand Prix, and despite a very competitive Daniel Ricciardo nearly giving a challenge to George Russell for P6, Verstappen wins by about 15 seconds. Hamilton somehow had enough tyre life left in those medium tyres at the end of the Grand Prix to go for the fastest lap attempt, which he actually got, which was quite something really for Hamilton to get the fastest lap on 37 old lap medium, something like that. Anyway, Leclerc finishes out the podium. Sainz, Norris, Russell, Ricciardo, what a drive. Piastri, Albon gets P9, Ocon P10 after poor Hulkenberg, man. His tyres just disappeared again. But, Max Verstappen's so inevitable, especially at this track. I mean, he's just ridiculously good at this track. 16 wins on the season, another record. Smashed through some more records as well in terms of laps led today. But again, apart from the masterclass at the front of the grid, it's Sergio Perez in the spotlight again. The Saturday wasn't great. Today was, another just terrible day in the season. And surely if Red Bull haven't already made a decision, their decision is being made for them. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.